Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast. Now, our next guest is the author of 6 books of poetry, a recipient of fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Guggenheim Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts. He has been awarded a Pushcart Prize, a Witting Writers Award, and has been honored by the Pew Fellowship in the Arts and the Witter Bynner Foundation in conjunction with the Library of Congress. My goodness. He also serves as the poetry editor of the Harvard Review. He's also the celebrated poetry podcast, The Slowdown. Now, please welcome to the podcast, Major Jackson. Major, how are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me, Amanda. Truly.
Absolutely. No, I'm so happy that we could have you on the show today. I mean, it's really all the things that you've done. I mean, really our dedication to poetry and to really see someone do so well in that career field, I think gives a lot of people inspiration. But, first and foremost, I always like to ask people, where are you currently at in the world right now? We need longitudinal, all that. No, I'm just kidding. Where are you currently at in the world right now?
I am in Music City, Nashville, Tennessee, and I have to admit there's a reason why I'm here. I think some of it has to do with ancestors at work because my family is originally from here, so I spent summers here from age 2 to 12. So I'm excited to kind of be back on what really does feel like ancestral ground. I'm doing all kinds of research into my family tree and looking up addresses. So this is home in a lot of ways. When I initially said yes to moving here as a result of an offer from Vanderbilt University to leave University of Vermont, where I've been 18 years, I have to admit I wasn't sure what the experience was going to be like, but I'm having a blast of a time, truly.
Absolutely. No, that's really cool, really cool. For you, I mean, like, when do you, again, like I said, you've had such a amazing career, especially working with poetry. But I want to take it back before we get into the now. I really want to take it back. Tell us a little bit about your background and where you grew up originally.
Sure.
And kind of, did poetry find you as a child or did you find poetry?
Sure. I grew up in Philadelphia and was a teenager in the 80s and 90s. And what that means is I was right at the verge of a hip hop as well as the Reagan years and the crack epidemic. And all of those particular forces had pretty much shaped me. By the time I would go to college, also in Philadelphia, at Temple University, I was fortunate enough to enroll in the class with the great poet Sonia Sanchez. And Sonia was someone like her peers who understood art to have both a personal reflection, but also one in which your art existed in relationship to others. So community. So prior to then, however, I too, like some of your previous guests who are around my age, wanted to be an MC. And so my relationship with language began with hip hop. I've also fortunately had in my household books. And among those books were 2 books of poetry, Langston Hughes and Robert Frost. So my introduction to poetry came from within the household. I say introduction as if it was formal, but to be honest, I stumbled upon these books on a rainy day. And my grandmother was very adamant about literacy, and on rainy days, she would say, instead of watching TV, read a book. Wow. And I was drawn to those books because, a poem is digestible in a very short amount of time. So that when my grandma said, "Did you read a book?" I would say, yep, I read a book. And it was normally one poem, you know.
Yeah.
So that was my introduction to poetry. And when you're introduced to poetry at a young age, something about the rhythms and the sonics get inside you. And so I could recite, you know, poems by those two poets. By the time I hit high school, I read so many of those poems that I could recite them off the top of my head, which was great practice for wanting to be an MC. And if you got into a freestyle battle, you know, your skills were ready, you know.
Absolutely.
So so yeah, home, Temple University, classes with Sonia Sanchez, and several other poets, a poet named Tina Barr, who teaches at in Memphis, and there's a guy named Kress, Professor Kress. Being in school at that time, you know the power of sharing your work.
Mm,
And it was something about the community of a classroom
mm.
that I took to, that workshop model where we're all kind of around the table looking at each other's words was a real opening moment for me, a bonding moment. I was not an English major. I was a business major specializing in accounting. And so this was a great kind of balance to my educational program at the time.
Wow. No, that's pretty amazing. I always am so curious, I'm more than sure it's a lot of people do want to engage in writing, specifically as a career. I think so much of the time what happens is they're not in a space or community that really harnesses that type of talent or
Mm.
nurtures it. How much do you
Mhm.
think that environment factor for you played such a role in terms of your trajectory, in terms of your work?
Mhm. It was huge. I think part of what I was getting inculcated into and was that poetry was a kind of a state,
Mm,
Estate, an estate, a creative estate. And there was mentorship happening and
mm.
a kind of passing off. Um, Sonia at one point saw me on campus. I write about this somewhere and said, you know, come young brother, I'm gonna give a reading and I want you to read some of your poems
Mm.
before I read. And it was pretty much my first public reading. It was at Bard College. A car came to pick us up.
Wow.
We watched one of the episodes of The Godfather in the car. By the time we get to campus, there's this elder on stage and he's sitting in a wheelchair. And Sonia goes, after she's introduced, I want to thank my brother Chinua Achebe for uh, for being here tonight. And my mouth dropped. Things fall apart, Chinua Achebe. Are you kidding? So, so there
Yeah.
was this introduction to the life of the mind, introduction to the art, but also an introduction to community. And so that is very much a part, it's a pillar of who I am as a particular poet, teaching, mentorship, writing within community, and spreading the love of that community through one's work and through one's action. So I would say the environment, the community was really, really important and shaped me. You know, home was different. You
Yeah.
know, home
Yeah.
was like, we're going to catch up with him. Like
Yeah.
they left me be. I was already like, you know, into books, and there was that kind of, we need to protect him. We don't understand what he's doing, but let's help nurture him in some way. But
Yeah.
you know, also he needs to feed himself. So that's why I was encouraged to go into accounting.
Yeah. That I have so many questions. I mean, to find out Achebe is about to go on the same. How old were you during that time? If you don't mind me asking, about what was your age at that point?
I would say I was either a sophomore or junior in college. And so that put me around 19, 20.
I mean, I mean, just when I mean, was your head about to explode? I mean, that was
Oh,
your first
yeah.
time performing. I mean, how did that even feel? Because that came at you surprise, surprise.
Yes, big time. So much so I probably was not even paying attention to Sonia's reading and just staring at Achebe. Um, Afterwards, we went back to his home, and his son and wife were there. It was just wonderful to listen to the two of them talk about old friends,
Mm,
um, talk about the magazine, because that's the other thing I want to say is that not only was I introduced to the people, but it was almost like they were an oral kind of reading list. You know, if they said someone's name, I lodged it, you know, and I found their books. But they were talking about, I remember magazine Presence Africaine
mm.
uh, out of Paris, I think. And
Wow.
it was an introduction to negritude, you know. So
Mhm.
you know, it did blow my mind. It did hit sideways, but those kinds of lessons, I think, are just as important as the lessons that one gets in the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And kind of a last point about your childhood. I think it's interesting, you had said, your parents really wanted you to kind of gear towards that accounting, to get that kind of stable career. I know for me, it was to be able to tell kind of family and friends, hey, I'm pursuing poetry. It wasn't until there was some success happening, and success is relative, that I really felt comfortable, like, hey, yeah, I actually have this going on. For you, how was it kind of telling your family this is the road that I'm going down? Or was it from jump, you were very much open, hey, I'm going to pursue poetry, the arts, writing, accounting isn't really what I'm going for? How did that kind of splay itself out for you?
Well, I did finish with a degree in accounting, a BS. I like
A VS. There you go.
and and I joined up right after college. I became curator, both finance director of a contemporary art center in Philadelphia, and it
Mhm.
was a performance space, and they presented theater, live music across the genres, uh, poetry readings, and so I had to curate the poetry program, and I linked up with this group called the Darkroom Collective,
Mm.
and they were out of Boston, Cambridge, and they the art center was right across the street from Intozaki Shande's place. And they knew
Wow.
Intozaki because they had their own reading series, and they had invited Intozaki to come read for them. So when she heard that they were coming, um, they pretty much crashed in her 2-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
And and I had seen Intozaki around, but this was really wonderful because I got, you know, get to sit down and talk to her. But the dark room, we would go around and give readings. And this one season or several months, we gave
Mm.
readings, and we called it the Drive-By series. And I was honored to be a part of the Darkroom Collective, even though none of us had really published yet, except for maybe Carl Phillips.
Mm.
And Darkroom Collective is Intozaki Shani is you can read up about them, but very important group. Kevin Young, Natasha Trethwaite, Tracy K. Smith,
Wow.
Tom Ellis, Sharon Strange. I can go on and on. I had invited my family to come to this reading, and they they didn't understand. It's like, yo, you're reading poems? I say, yeah. It's at a bookstore, and my mom was ill at that time, and my grandfather came, my little brother came, my mom, and an aunt, and it was my mom would die probably maybe a couple, maybe a month or 2 after that. And that was my coming out. And it felt like a gift,
Mm.
for me to share my life.
Yeah.
My grandfather, he lived a decade and a half after that. So he was able to kind of watch me grow and blossom as a
Mm.
writer. And he is the one that said, he was, because we share a name,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
it was really impressive for him to see his name in print. Like that,
Mm.
we take these things for credit. But when he saw Major Jackson,
Yeah.
saw
Yeah.
his name, like this is a man born in the South in the early 1900s.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a gift. So they got it. Isn't that something? Print,
Yeah.
Anyway, that's how I came to answer your question. That's how they learned about me as a writer at that moment when they came to that reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that's a beautiful thing, really. I mean, I like how you described it. It was like a gift. It was like almost like a gift to them. And yeah, we definitely do take some of those things for granted. While
And
they're
to
here.
me.
Yeah, and to yourself, absolutely. I'm so curious, you've authored now 6 books of poetry. I'm so curious from writers from the beginning of your career to now, what is your writing based off of? Now you've had 6 books of poetry from the beginning, from the first book that you wrote to now what you have now. Has your
Mhm.
writing changed in terms of what you're inspired by to write about, or do you feel
Oh,
like you've had a relative flow in your career?
it has changed, and it's, I want to say it's more like, okay, I've decided to bring them just look at them and reflect.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, I have a restless imagination,
Mm,
and it's almost like 2 trains running. On on one train, I am really dedicated to the idea that my writing should have function in the world. Now, I'm not going to write poems based on ideology that my writing will not serve an ideology. My writing is an expression of my freedom, and my freedom,
mm,
it models a way for people to exist inside and outside language. So my first book, Leaving Saturn, really dealt with a portrait of the Black community that I wanted to push up against.
mm,
If you turned for a portrait of the African-American community in mass media, it wasn't a pretty picture.
yeah.
But my neighbors were responsible, hardworking. Yes, there were challenges, and with grace and dignity, they faced those challenges. Art was central to that, and imagination was central to that. So, Leaving Saturn was definitely a book that had a kind of great intention. And I would say every book after that has kind of carried that mantle or that flag of
Mm,
community. Even the poems that someone might identify as difficult,
mm,
uh, experimental. Um, but if there's anything that's consistent, it's been that idea. I'm someone who believes like Robert Hayden, who is also an important influence to me, who said, writing is an act of discovery. Like I'm
mm,
going in also figuring out what my vision is. Sometimes I don't know. That was definitely the case with Holding Company, which is a book of 10-line poems. And the assignment came while I was on fellowship at the Radcliffe Institute to write a poem celebrating the 10th anniversary of Cave Canem, which is another organization that has held me up over the years. Um, and those 10 lines were just that box, that container of a 10-line poem, really kind of shaped the next book because I
mm.
got addicted
Wow.
to writing them. So I just want to say, like, hoops, Roll Deep, The Absurd Man, all of them emerge out of a restless consciousness and imagination.
Mm.
So with each book, I learn something that I didn't do before.
Hmm. Yeah. That's so interesting. I'm so curious too, for you, how did so many people that watch this show, one of the questions I get all the time is like, ask them about how do they get there? How do you even get the start in publishing? How do you go from just writing poems on just a page, maybe your iPhone, to even starting in publishing? For someone like you who's now done six, for you, what was that even like being able to get the first book published? And obviously, maybe, what have you seen different that is what poets are doing today in today's time, trying to get their first book published, as opposed to maybe what you did?
Hmm. I I I got hit by lightning.
Okay.
I'm a unicorn.
Yeah.
A pot of gold fell out of the sky. I should correct that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Cave Canem, shortly after it was founded, started a book prize. And the very first judge was Rita Dove.
Wow.
And Rita Dove chose Natasha Trethway's Domestic Work. The second judge was Al Young. And I didn't even know a deadline was coming up until a friend called me up and said, "Hey, Major, are you going to apply for that book prize by Cave Canem?" And I said, "When's the deadline?" He goes, "Tomorrow."
Tomorrow.
So I had recently finished my graduate degree at University of Oregon, my MFA, and I had my thesis. And so this was a year after I finished. So I was going through that book and with a glass of wine. And I had been writing since then. So I put in some new poems, shifted some things around,
Mm.
and sent it off. And by the time it's pretty wild actually. I forgot about it. And
Wow.
so
Mm.
when I got a call from the late Carolyn Micklem, who's the executive director of Cave Canem at the time, that I had won, I was like, a book prize? I was like, oh, snap. So,
Wow. Yeah.
and then the journey began. And
Mm.
that was, it was really a great series of events that led to that moment. And I have flashpoints of success after that feel very, I'm truly blessed. The books that came after that book was with University of Georgia Press, and it was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Prize.
Wow. Yeah.
Whereby my longtime editor at the ceremony, my longtime editor Jill Bialowski, came up to me and said, "Major, do you have a manuscript? Would love to publish you
Wow.
at W.W. Norton." And I lied and said, "Yeah, I got a manuscript." She said, and she detected something. She said, "How far are you?" I said, "Oh, probably 80%. I think I had 3 poems."
Yeah.
So it took me, I signed a contract and then I wrote a book called Hoops. And Hoops came out 2006.
Wow, man. Wow. Okay.
And
It's
then every
definitely,
book
yeah.
has been with Norton since. So
Wow.
I'm very blessed. I'm very fortunate that those 2 moments happened, both Cave Canem and meeting my editor.
I mean, it's one of those things too. It's you really kind of look back on that. I mean, can you say right place, right time? I mean, just when hard work meets just that opportunity and luck. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is just like acclamation of all those things. If for you, in today's world, it looks maybe a bit different. What are your thoughts on just like poetry in today's world? A lot of people they're getting discovered through social media, Instagram, Twitter. What do you think about that kind of whole I want to say renaissance almost of social media poetry,
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
necessarily not necessarily a chapbook or even a full length book is something
Hmm.
that necessarily poets are doing these days?
Hmm. No, it's legit. I mean, there's no kind of prescribed or predetermined
Mm,
pathway for any particular writer. There are models, and all of them, in my mind, are valid. So someone becoming viral through a poem on social media means that their words have reached people. And I think
yeah.
that is as important as quote unquote a poetry career.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
so my hope would be, however, is that we as a community maintain standards of art that remain high. Let's put it that way. Um, and there's something about the role of editors who have a vertical and a horizontal understanding of the art
mm,
and can
mm.
not so much play gatekeepers, but they can situate a new voice in the constellation of voices and articulate why this particular poet is important and should be heard. And I believe teachers do that as well. They are purveyors, amplifiers of voices from the past. And I always think it's important to have that awareness if you are a writer of poetry. Publishing through social media or through a chapbook contest, self-publishing, or publishing with an independent press.
Mm,
I think it's important to realize that those voices from the past, that not only are we kind of standing on their shoulders, but we're advancing the art to higher levels to kind
yeah.
of meet the demands of the age that we're living in today.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a beautiful way to put it. Absolutely. I want to move a little bit forward. So you've been awarded quite a few things: a Pushcart Prize, a Winning Writers Award, honored by the Pew Fellowship in the Arts, the Library of Congress. I mean, those are so many accolades and just such heavy accolades. At this point in your career, what do those accolades mean to you, though?
I am deeply honored.
Mm,
They are encouraging. I, again, feel a sense of gratitude and blessed that my work has, to some extent, I can't say this with great confidence because we have to also say that awards and prizes are, they come down sometimes to taste. There's so
yeah.
many other writers and poets who are equally deserving. So there's something subjective about them as well. However, I'm deeply blessed, grateful, and also realize that I cannot rest on those laurels.
Mm,
Like, as one of my mentors said, you know, you accept award, you express gratitude, and then you go back to your desk and do the work.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think right now I also want to be an inspiration for others.
Mm,
And I belong to probably, I want to say maybe fourth wave, fifth wave of American poetry by African Americans that uh, help diversify the canon.
mm,
Uh,
mm-hmm.
and increasingly, particularly as a teacher, it's important that my students realize that that is not radical anymore, that
Mm,
that's not groundbreaking, that they understand that all voices are welcome to the table.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's such an interesting way to put it. Reflecting on those types of honors, you had said your teacher had, give gratitude and get right back to work. For you, I mean, it's such an interesting thing. I think as I we talked about success a little bit earlier.
Mhm.
I think for a lot of writers, until they reach that point of they receive that statue or they receive that honor, that title, it's I don't really have that success as a poet specifically. It's such a kind of marginalized niche field. A lot of people feel as if, well, until you really get some sort of award for it, I mean, are you really a actual poet? For you, I mean, what do you think of that line of thinking, and how is that kind of how do you really define your success, whatever that success means to you?
It is that success. Look, being a poet is one in which you live a life of kind of a monastic life, a
Mm,
contemplative life. And there's something about the act of writing. I mentioned earlier one of discovery. It's a discovery of the world, but also yourself.
mm,
And in that sense, it makes it a very useful practice because it's also one in which you are emerging and constantly defining yourself by the works that you create.
mm,
And so success for me is not measured in terms of those awards. It's measured by how much I have grown in the world and how much I love myself and love the
mm.
world around me. Like
Yeah.
that is ultimately, I'm not, it's not an egocentric pursuit like most people think. Um, uh, I invite into my classroom every young person that steps into my classroom.
Hmm.
And because I also teach continuing learners, um, they already have my admiration.
Mm,
They are already poets.
yeah.
They have done that work in which they know to write language is really a pursuit of the self. And sometimes there are structures in the world that are not comfortable with people coming close to loving themselves because
Yeah.
we can't sell them anything.
Yeah.
There's nothing
Yeah.
that they
Yeah.
feel, you know, that
Mm,
they feel that they need to kind of patch up
hmm.
and buying is going to patch that up. So success for me is as soon as you say I'm a poet, you're a poet. You don't need the awards. Publication will come with long, it is also a lifelong art, meaning you
Yeah.
sign up to be a lifelong learner because there's so much you can do and learn from poetry.
Mm, yeah. I love that. I love that a lot, as an educator myself too. That is such a beautiful thing to make sure your students know. You already
Yeah.
have my admiration from the second you walked in that door. I mean, that's a lot of kids, a lot of students really need to hear that. I mean, really, golly, that's a very powerful thing to give your students for sure. I am so curious, as we're talking about education, you're again some more accolades. I'll make you blush. You're the Gertrude Conaway Vanderbilt Chair in the Humanities at Vanderbilt University. You serve as the poetry editor at the Harvard Review. I'm always so curious, how does your work as an educator of poetry, not only just as a curator, a creator of poetry, but as an educator of poetry, really, how do you feel like that's a jumping off point for real dialogue just in our world, even more so?
Mm-hmm. We have at any one point in the classroom, I want to say, I've taught up to in creative writing workshops. This is when I first started teaching, there were 12, and then it grew to 15, then it grew to 18 students, souls, and they're looking at each other's words. Where else in life does that happen?
Mm,
Someone has
yeah.
created something out of language that is a reflective of their experiences. It emerged out of their imagination. And so my students think they are learning the
Mm,
skills to be writers, but what they're also learning is to get in to sit at the table and to come to treasure each other, each other's experience, each other's life, each other's words, and a certain level of regard happens. They're also learning ostensibly how to apply measures of greatness and articulate that in such a way that a writer across the table can hear that. So they're realizing that even in the act of being critical, it has to be carefulness, love, compassion, empathy. We're not at the table to crush someone's dreams. We're not there to say you're not a poet.
Yeah.
What we're there to do is to uplift, and in a lot of ways, and apply standards of the art as a measure. That for me personally, there's no more. It is among it's one of the sacred places to be. Let's put it that way, in the classroom. I think because so many of us go through and have different experiences in the classroom, we kind of write it off sometimes. But it is a sacred moment of sharing and exchange. I'm not sure if I answer your question, but I do know I go at it with the utmost and highest regard. I treasure watching young people come into themselves with confidence. Talk about the measure of success as a poet. Let's talk about it as a teacher. If my students are holding their heads up a little higher, and they're also understanding that language shapes reality and shapes their world, and they can shape it, that's my success.
Absolutely. No,
in that space. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, as I started a new career in journalism now, and broadcast journalism. And prior to that, thank you. Prior to that, I was in academia, and I'm just doing internal snaps in my head when you were saying the classroom is a sacred space, because it's so true, you know, and it's kind of one of those things, you know, us as students, you know, we were all students for the most part at one point. A lot of people probably had maybe negative experiences coming into a classroom. To be able to kind of now, truly as an educator, really give that to your students, that nurturing place to where they can, hey, no mistake is a bad mistake. You know, we can all learn from something. We can all uplift each other. You're correct. There's no other place like that. I think I don't even know on planet Earth where you really get to share with people in the same type of way outside of that classroom. No, I completely agree. That really is the true mark of a good teacher. No, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. You know, as we are kind of wrapping up and slowing down, talk about your podcast, The Slowdown.
The Slowdown. The Slowdown. Well, let's just acknowledge, I it's a podcast with great lineage. I didn't start it, of course. Tracy K. Smith, who was at the time Poet Laureate of the US, began this wonderful podcast of presenting a poem with an introduction. And the power, I believe, of this 5 to 8 minute podcast is hearing someone think through, which we don't get too often, kind of think through a poem and its relevance.
Yes.
Almost creating a space for us to enter into the poem such that we can hear it a little bit clearer as it's applied to a single life. Tracy, followed by Ada Limon, who would become U.S. Poet Laureate. And, I bow down to Ada, man, because both of them are so talented, and they're great poets, and they're also so connected to life that I went to the podcast as much to hear what they had to say about the world as I did to hear the poem itself. The podcast is doing great, but it's also doing it's a great service to the world.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the news, you can hear that. There's podcasts where people have conversations around politics or everything from politics to knitting, to the New York Times crossword puzzle. There's a podcast for it, right?
Yeah.
But in this particular case, we are spotlighting the work of poets. I was going to say in America, but poets across the English-speaking world. And that kind of plurality really undergirds a notion of a democracy.
Wow.
You know, the poems that we are hearing, they represent a broad range of human experience that creates a bridge to our own lives. And so I'm very much enjoying writing my own reflections, reading the poems, and I'm reading at a rate of intensity that I've never read before. I mean, I have students, there's the slush pile of the Harvard Review, there's contests that I've judged. None of them compare to me going into books and trying to come up with a poem. And once I find it, I'm so excited. I was like, a lot of people are going to so love this or going to connect with this one, or they're going to say, you know, but mostly I think people really hear a poem that they didn't know they needed to hear either. That's also
that's
a part of it as well. And as a result, they feel a little bit more seen, a little bit more fortified.
Yeah. You know what I love about it too is it's the idea you're taking a poem and that's the podcast. I mean, it's not all podcasts are great, but it's something different. It really does, it implies the slowdown. I mean, really taking time to really hear words is something I think a lot of us, we don't really do. And I think that's really what's very impactful about that podcast. I wanted to ask you, you're carrying the torch, like you said, amazing people that have came before you that did the podcast. How does that feel? And what was that call like to hey, we would like you to now from Ada Limon. I mean, like all these people to now for you to do it. What was that feeling like?
Well, because I've been a long time fan of the podcast, I, again, deeply, deeply honored. I mean, these were like language vitamins in the morning that I could take and to see myself on the other. I never thought about it. So when the call came, it was one in which I was excited, I was honored, but I also had to think about myself on the other side of something that I loved so much. And once I reflected on it, then I thought, like I've been doing this my whole life, but in other platforms and in other spaces. It's been a very, and yet there's also, for me personally, as someone who's in the classroom, now to be part of be part of the podcasting world in a way, I like the idea. It's like, this is the best midlife adventure for me. I'm about to publish my new and selected, and now I'm moving into this area of communicating at a mass level through a podcast. I love that. I love the idea of possibility and growth at this point.
No, that's a beautiful thing.
You must feel that way going into broadcast journalism, right?
I would say maybe not midlife, quarter life crisis.
Quarter life, okay. I'll go with quarter life.
Well, not crisis, but you know what, quarter life. It is. I like that. I completely agree with you. Kind of finding new ways to spread your creativity is something that is such a lifelong thing. It's like you're always seeking out, you're always thirsting for something, kind of even more ways to kind of spread that love of. For me, I know that's just oral tradition, being able to have a platform to tell even more stories. So for me, it's one of those things. I get completely where you're coming from.
And probably driven by curiosity, right? Like we're curious beings, so So it
Absolutely.
makes sense.
Curious, I remember I was telling a friend this the other day, like to like be like an artist or storyteller in any type of format. I think it's just there's a bit of you that is just off the rocker because you have to be to do this type of work. I mean, you can't stop. I mean, it's just always running through
Yeah,
you. So always
yeah.
very having that curiosity. Major, I want to ask you, when did you know you were a writer? Was there an exact moment? Was there an exact point in your life? When did you know that you were a writer, that you
Mm,
wanted to write?
that's a complicated one. Well, I started off by mentioning the age of which I emerged. And I want to say I wasn't a writer. I did not start off writing, but I was a reader. And I read pretty deeply, and I knew somehow I was going to make the turn. And the turn for me was when I purchased my first journal
Wow. Yeah.
in high school. In high school, I still own it. It's the beat up small little journal.
Wow.
And in it is just little rhymes here and there. Uh, I would make collages. There's some collages in there. There's reflections on reflection. Couldn't call them reflection. They were kind of quick meditations about a girl or two that I liked.
There we go.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So the journal was that kind of, it was almost like, you know, it started the engine going, this
Mm,
this right here, doing this, doing it over and over. I didn't have a personal PC back then, didn't have a laptop. It
wow.
was it was hand to paper. That's when I became a writer, and then started writing raps. MC Dink rhymes with think.
Mm. Okay. There we go.
Oh
MC
my
thing.
God. And then I enrolled in my very first poetry class, and it was with Sonia Sanchez at Temple
No.
University. And didn't look back.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and it was a wrap ever since then. There we go. And Major, so the last question that I have for you today, we ask every poet that comes on the Poet Speaks podcast. Major,
Uh-oh.
tell me, why do you need to get your words out?
I need to get my words out because if I don't, I would feel imprisoned
Mm,
and silenced. I said earlier, my writing is an expression of my freedom.
mm,
And I take that quite seriously. Um, I'm responding to the world around me. I'm responding to
mm,
the people I encounter, the art I ingest, the music that I dance to.
mm.
Um, my writing says not only am I free, but I'm also alive.
Yeah, wow.
And that's what I try to pass on. That's the question that I ask all of my graduate students. Where are you most alive in your poetry?
Mm,
Where are you breathing? Where are you walking? Where are you dancing? Where
mm,
are you tasting the world? And once they hook onto that, there's no stopping them.
mm.
It's no stopping them. So that's why I need to write.
Beautiful, beautiful. No, thank you for that. That's an amazing answer. That's a beautiful answer. And as we wrap up, tell us what's 2023 looking like for your writing and beyond, and tell us where can folks find you in terms of
Okay.
social media and all that good stuff.
So I'm turning in today the
Oh,
last edit of my, oh, you can't see it. There it is.
Razzle
Razzle
Dazzle.
Dazzle. It'll be out September 5th, 2023. And I again, it's new and selected poems. So it's about maybe 30 new poems and selected poems from previous books.
Nice.
These guys.
There we go. On the screen. There you go.
But again, like I said, I'm a little restless. So I'm also continuing to write a long sequence called Urban Renewal, which is a long poem that's published in maybe about four of the volumes have urban renewal poems in them. So I need to tie the bow on this project that I began 25 years ago. So that's me in 2023, and also writing some personal essays and writing the Slowdown. That's my writing life right now.
Absolutely. Where can folks come and find you? Website links or anything like that?
Sure. Please check me out at www.majorjackson.com.
Perfect.
Twitter, I'm there too, poet_major. Instagram, Poet Major Jackson.
Perfect. All right. Sounds good. All right, everyone. Major's information will be down in the details and description box wherever you are listening to this podcast at. So everyone go ahead, click on those links, go check out all of Major's amazing work. And Major, big thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We really appreciate you being a guest on the Poet Speaks podcast. Again, y'all go check out all of Major's amazing work. And this is the Poet Speaks podcast. We will talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.